The scorching heat of the Sierra Nevada sun beats down on a ragged group of men, their clothes torn, their faces caked with dirt, but their eyes glint with a strange mixture of exhaustion and hope. For months, they've scrambled through the foothills, their hands raw and blistered, searching for a gleam of gold, just one nugget to change their fate. Every day brings the promise of discovery, yet every night they sleep on the cold ground, wondering if the elusive riches they seek are only a mirage, forever out of reach. In 1848, the land was whispering secrets, but only a handful of people could hear it. The rush for gold was about to explode, one of the most transformative events in American history. The story of the California gold rush is often told through the lens of its most famous figures: the miners who struck it rich, the entrepreneurs who profited off their dreams, and the millions who followed westward in search of fortune. But behind those well-known tales lies a far more complex and often forgotten chapter, one where the first prospectors, the unsung pioneers, battled not just the land, but also their own sense of survival and identity. The first men to arrive at Sutter's Mill didn't have the luxury of the booming cities that would soon rise in their wake. They didn't have the luxury of knowing that the world would soon come rushing toward them. They were the ones who picked up their picks, their pans, and their hopes in the quiet solitude of the mountains, with nothing but the uncertainty of the wild and the flicker of their dreams to guide them. It was a small, almost inconsequential discovery. James W. Marshall, a carpenter working for John Sutter at Sutter's Mill, stumbled upon a shiny rock in the American River. The mill was supposed to be the hub of Sutter's ambitious agricultural empire, not a place for gold to be found. But what Marshall found wasn't just a rock, it was the beginning of an avalanche. Word spread quickly, and within weeks, thousands of people from every corner of the country, and even the world, descended upon California, hoping to strike it rich. But before the chaos began, there was a brief moment of quiet, a time when the first prospectors moved silently through the thick forests, taking their chances with the land. Among them were men who had been through worse, miners from the east, farmers looking for a fresh start, and dreamers who had heard only rumors of California's riches. They were the first to feel the land's power, to taste its promise, and to face its harsh realities. One of these men was a man named William Garrison, an unremarkable farmer from Missouri, who in 1848 took a gamble and traveled westward to find his fortune. Garrison was a man of simple means, a farmer who had little to lose but everything to gain. The year before, his small farm had been ravaged by drought, and his family was living on the edge of survival. So, when he heard whispers of gold in California, he packed up what little he had left and set out with nothing more than a vague sense of hope. Arriving at Sutter's Mill, Garrison found himself amid a world-changing discovery. He wasn't alone, of course. There were other men who had arrived before him, staking their claim on the riverbanks. But Garrison didn't care about the competition. He worked day and night, panning for gold with single-minded determination. Unlike the thousands who would later follow, Garrison wasn't motivated by dreams of fame or fortune. He was driven by necessity. He needed to survive. For weeks he found nothing. The river, once promising, now seemed to mock him. But then, one morning, after a night of endless rain, Garrison's pan glimmered with the unmistakable shine of gold. He had found it, not much, but enough to feel the weight of possibility in his hands. He was the first of the early prospectors to uncover the treasure, and with that discovery, his world would never be the same. But the gold wasn't the only thing these first prospectors were after. The land itself, so raw and untamed, had a hold on them. The solitude of the mountains, the challenge of the wilderness, became as much a part of the journey as the search for gold itself. It was a brutal life, sleeping under the stars, living off meager rations, battling sickness and hunger. Some died from exhaustion, some from diseases like dysentery or malaria, and others simply vanished into the wilderness, lost to time. Perhaps the most haunting stories are those of the Native American tribes who had lived on this land for generations before the gold seekers arrived. The Miwok, the Nisenan, the Maidu, tribes who had thrived in the rich environment of the Sierra foothills. As the first prospectors began to mine the riverbeds, their lives were disrupted in ways that would devastate entire communities. The influx of miners brought violence, disease, and the destruction of the land that the indigenous people had long depended on. Some prospectors, in their desperation and greed, took it upon themselves to steal, kill, or enslave native people in an effort to further their claims. One particularly tragic figure was a Miwok woman named Taya, who had watched her family and village fall apart as the first waves of miners arrived. Taya's people had long been accustomed to the rhythms of the land, the changing seasons, the life-giving rivers, the hunting grounds. But the gold rush upended everything. Her village was one of the first to be overwhelmed by prospectors looking to stake their claim. The land they had lived on for centuries was no longer theirs. As the miners expanded, Taya's tribe was forced off their ancestral land, scattered by violence and disease, and pushed further into the wild. While history often celebrates the gold rush as a story of success and opportunity, the voices of the first prospectors, the ones who arrived when the land was still an untamed frontier, are often forgotten. It was they who endured the harshest conditions, who braved a wilderness that, even with gold in their hands, offered no guarantees. It was they who battled nature itself, and in doing so, helped shape the California that would rise from the chaos of the gold fields. As the rush grew, the landscape changed. The small mining camps evolved into bustling cities, and the rough and rugged prospectors were soon joined by men of business, gamblers, and dreamers seeking their own slice of the American dream. But the men who first arrived, the ones who found the first flecks of gold, were the ones who understood the true cost of that dream. Theirs was not the story of easy wealth. It was the story of survival, perseverance, and grit in the face of adversity. And then there were the women, who made their own unique marks on this chaotic chapter. While most of the gold miners were men, a handful of women played pivotal roles, not in panning for gold, but in keeping the camps alive. They ran boarding houses, set up businesses, and often found themselves the only source of stability in the chaos. They were the mothers, the wives, the sisters, the unsung heroines who managed to carve out a life in a place that seemed to offer no place for them at all. But the myth of instant wealth, the promises of gold as a cure-all for hardship, would ultimately fade for most of these first prospectors. The real gold, the kind that promised lasting prosperity, was found by few, and many who came seeking fortune ended up with nothing more than memories of hardship, disillusionment, and lost dreams. Yet, even in their failure, the first prospectors left behind something invaluable. Stories of courage and endurance that laid the groundwork for the transformation of California into the state we know today. They were the ones who risked everything to pursue a dream, knowing full